The quiet suburban town of Maplewood buzzed with the gentle hum of springtime activity. The scent of blooming flowers wafted through the air, mingling with the distant laughter of children playing after school. It was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever seemed to happen, until one fateful day when Karen Peterson, a local figure both respected and mildly feared, found herself at the center of an incident no one in town would forget. Karen was known for her sharp eyes and even sharper tongue. She had lived in Maplewood for over 20 years and had taken it upon herself to maintain the neighborhood's order. Whether it was chastising teenagers for skateboarding too close to parked cars or reminding dog owners to pick up after their pets, Karen had earned a reputation as the town's unofficial watchdog. But even Karen, with her knack for uncovering minor infractions, was unprepared for what she stumbled upon that spring afternoon. The day had started uneventfully. Karen had spent her morning pruning her azaleas and sipping her signature chamomile tea on the front porch. By early afternoon, she decided to take a walk to the nearby park, a small, serene patch of greenery nestled behind Maplewood Elementary. The park, usually a hub of family picnics and casual games of frisbee, had been unusually quiet since spring break had ended the week before. Karen enjoyed her walks, but as she strolled under the shade of the oak trees, something caught her attention. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a group of kids darting between the bushes at the far end of the park. Their movements were quick and deliberate, and their hushed giggles carried faintly on the breeze. Karen's brow furrowed. It wasn't uncommon for kids to play hide and seek in the park, but something about their behavior seemed suspicious. She decided to investigate. With the quiet precision of someone who had perfected the art of sneaking up on mischief makers, Karen crept closer. She could now hear snippets of their conversation, punctuated by the rustling of plastic bags. "Did you get the gummy worms?" one of the kids whispered. "Yeah, but keep it quiet. If anyone sees us, we're dead," replied another, his voice tinged with a mix of excitement and fear. Karen's curiosity turned into suspicion. Peeking through the dense foliage, she finally saw them. 4 kids, no older than 12, were huddled together, their backpacks splayed open in the middle of their circle. The contents spilled onto the ground, revealing a dazzling array of candy, chocolate bars, lollipops, gummy bears, sour candies, and more. It looked like they had raided an entire candy store. Karen's jaw dropped. She stepped closer, snapping a twig under her foot. The kids froze, their heads whipping around in unison. The silence was deafening for a moment, broken only by the sound of a candy wrapper crinkling under someone's shoe. "What on earth is going on here?" Karen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. Her arms were crossed, her piercing gaze fixed on the guilty group. The kids scrambled to their feet, their faces a mixture of terror and defiance. One of them, a lanky boy with freckles and a baseball cap, tried to hide a bag of jelly beans behind his back. Another, a girl with pigtails, stood frozen with a chocolate bar halfway to her mouth. We were just," began the boy, but Karen held up her hand to silence him. "Don't you dare lie to me, young man," she said sternly. "Where did all this candy come from? And why are you hiding it out here?" The kids exchanged nervous glances, clearly debating whether to come clean or concoct a story. Finally, the tallest of the group, a girl with glasses and a determined expression, stepped forward. "It's ours," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "We didn't steal it or anything. We wanted to have some fun." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Fun? By sneaking around like criminals? Do your parents know about this?" The kids shifted uncomfortably. Karen could tell from their expressions that the answer was a resounding no. She sighed and looked down at the massive pile of candy. It wasn't just a small stash for a group of kids. It was enough to supply an entire classroom. "What exactly are you planning to do with all of this?" Karen asked, her tone softening slightly but still firm. The boy in the baseball cap mumbled something incoherent, and Karen leaned closer. "Speak up," she said. "We were going to have a candy feast," he admitted, his cheeks turning red. After spring break, we thought it'd be cool to have a party. But like, not a normal party. A candy party. Karen blinked. A candy party. The kids nodded, and the girl with glasses added, "We all pooled our allowances and bought as much candy as we could. But we didn't want anyone else to find out because they might tell on us. So we came here to eat it in secret." Karen stared at them, incredulous. "Do you have any idea how much sugar is in all of this? You'll make yourselves sick." The kids looked down, ashamed but not entirely remorseful. Karen pinched the bridge of her nose, debating her next move. On the one hand, this wasn't exactly a crime worthy of police involvement. On the other hand, it was clear these kids needed a lesson in moderation and honesty. As Karen stood there, weighing her options, the freckled boy blurted out, "Please don't tell our parents. We'll do anything." Karen sighed. "Anything, huh? Well, first things first. You're cleaning up this mess. And then, we're going to have a long talk about why this was a terrible idea." The kids groaned but quickly obeyed, stuffing candy back into their backpacks. As they worked, Karen couldn't help but feel a flicker of amusement. It wasn't every day she caught kids red-handed in a candy hoard conspiracy. But little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would shake the entire town. Karen watched as the kids hurriedly stuffed the mountain of candy back into their backpacks, their faces flushed with embarrassment. The scene reminded her of a group of raccoons caught rifling through trash bins, equal parts guilty and indignant. She stood with her arms crossed, her sharp gaze fixed on them, trying to suppress the flicker of amusement tugging at the corners of her mouth. But despite the absurdity of the situation, her instincts told her there was more to this story than met the eye. As the kids finished cleaning up their stash, Karen decided it was time to get some answers. She gestured for them to sit on a nearby bench, and reluctantly they complied. The freckled boy, whose name she learned was Tommy, sat fidgeting with the strap of his backpack. The girl with glasses introduced herself as Mia, and beside her sat the girl with pigtails, Emma, who clutched her chocolate bar like a lifeline. The fourth member of the group, a quiet boy named Ben, avoided Karen's gaze altogether. Karen began her interrogation with the calm precision of a seasoned detective. "All right, kids, let's start from the beginning. Where did you get all that candy?" Tommy looked at Mia, clearly hoping she would answer. Mia, the apparent leader of the group, straightened her glasses and said, "We told you. We bought it. We've been saving up for weeks." Karen raised an eyebrow. "Weeks, huh? That's an awfully long time to plan a candy feast. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just eat it at home?" Emma, the youngest of the group, spoke up in a small voice. "Because we weren't supposed to have it." Karen's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, you weren't supposed to have it?" Emma glanced at Mia, who sighed and explained, "Our parents wouldn't let us. There's this whole thing about cutting back on sugar because of what happened last year." Karen tilted her head. "What happened last year?" The kids exchanged uneasy looks, and Tommy finally mumbled, "The candy incident." Karen blinked. "The candy incident." Mia nodded, her voice tinged with exasperation. "It was this huge deal. Some kids got really sick after eating too much candy at a school fundraiser. The principal banned candy from all school events, and our parents got super strict about it. It's been, like, impossible to have any fun ever since." Karen remembered hearing something about the incident. A few kids had ended up in the hospital with stomach aches and sugar crashes, and the local PTA had gone into overdrive, launching a health campaign that swept through the entire town. Suddenly, candy became public enemy number one, and Maplewood's once carefree attitude toward sweets turned into something resembling a Prohibition-era crackdown. Still, Karen couldn't help but feel that there was more to the story. "Okay, so your parents banned candy. But that doesn't explain why you're out here in the park with enough sweets to open a candy store. What's the real reason?" For a moment, the kids stayed silent, their eyes darting between each other as if silently debating whether to come clean. Finally, Ben, the quiet one, spoke up. His voice was barely above a whisper, but there was an edge of defiance in it. "It's for Jake," he said. Karen frowned. "Who's Jake?" Tommy answered this time. "He's our friend. He didn't get to do anything for spring break because his family doesn't have a lot of money right now. We thought if we threw him a candy party, it would cheer him up." The confession hung in the air, and for the first time, Karen felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen Jake around the neighborhood, a shy boy with a knack for keeping to himself. His father had lost his job at the factory a few months back, and the family had been struggling ever since. Karen softened her tone. "So this was all for Jake." Mia nodded. "We just wanted to do something nice for him. He's been really down lately, and we thought it'd be fun to surprise him." Karen sighed, her initial anger fading. While their actions were misguided, their intentions were undeniably heartfelt. She could see the sincerity in their eyes, and it reminded her of her own childhood, when small acts of rebellion often masked a desire to do good. But there was still the matter of the candy itself. "You said you bought all this with your allowances, right?" Karen asked. Mia hesitated before nodding. Karen wasn't convinced. "The truth, please." Tommy shifted uncomfortably and muttered, "We used some of it, but we might have, borrowed the rest." Karen's eyes widened. "Borrowed? From where?" The kids looked at each other nervously, and Maya finally admitted, "From the school fundraiser." Karen's stomach dropped. "You stole it." Mia quickly shook her head. "No, not exactly. It's just, they had all this leftover candy from the bake sale last week, and we thought no one would miss it." Karen couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You took candy from a school fundraiser without permission. That's stealing, Mia." "It wasn't like that," Emma blurted, tears welling up in her eyes. "We were going to put it back. We just needed it for Jake's party." Karen pinched the bridge of her nose, trying to process everything. This was no longer a simple case of kids sneaking candy. They had crossed a line, and now it was up to her to decide what to do about it. As Karen stood there, weighing her options, she noticed the kids watching her with a mixture of fear and hope. They weren't bad kids. They were just kids. Kids who had made a poor choice for what they thought was a good reason. But they needed to understand the consequences of their actions, and more importantly, they needed to make things right. "Here's what's going to happen," Karen said firmly. "First, you're going to return every single piece of candy you took from the fundraiser. Then, we're going to talk to the principal and explain what happened. You'll apologize and offer to help with the next school event to make up for what you did." The kids groaned, but Karen wasn't finished. "And after that, we'll figure out a way to cheer up Jake without breaking the rules." The kids looked at each other, reluctant but resigned. They nodded, and Karen felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could be a learning moment for all of them. As they packed up the candy and prepared to leave the park, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The truth had a way of unraveling in unexpected ways, and something told her there was more to this story than even the kids realized. For now, though, she was content to guide them back onto the right path, one step at a time. Karen walked with the kids back to the park's edge, their backpacks heavier than their steps. The air was thick with tension and embarrassment, a collective silence hanging between them. Karen's mind raced as she tried to figure out how to handle the situation delicately but effectively. She couldn't just let it slide, but she also didn't want to crush the kids' spirits entirely. After all, their intentions, however misguided, were born out of kindness. As they reached the main street leading to Maplewood Elementary, Karen glanced down at the kids. "You're all going to have to face the consequences of this. You know that, right?" Tommy shuffled his feet, his face a mix of shame and defiance. "Yeah, we know." Emma, clutching her backpack straps tightly, sniffled. "Are we going to get expelled?" Karen softened her tone. "No, Emma. But you can't just take something that doesn't belong to you, no matter how good your reasons are. You've got to take responsibility for your actions. Mia, who had been silent for most of the walk, spoke up. We'll tell the principal. We'll explain everything. But do you really think they'll believe us? Karen stopped and turned to face them, her hands on her hips. They'll believe you because I'll be there with you. I'm not going to let you handle this alone. But you'll have to be honest. That's the only way to fix this. The kids exchanged glances, a small spark of relief passing between them. It was clear they trusted Karen, even if they were wary of her stern demeanor. She led them toward the school, which was quiet now, with most of the students gone for the day. The only sign of life was the faint glow of the lights in the main office. Inside, Mrs. Randall, the school secretary, looked up from her desk, her expression shifting from polite interest to mild concern as she spotted the group. Karen, what's going on? And what's with the kids? Karen sighed and approached the desk. We need to speak to Principal Taylor. It's important. Mrs. Randall hesitated, then picked up the phone. Let me see if he's still here. The kids stood awkwardly by the door, their backpacks clutched tightly as if the candy inside had grown heavier with every step. Karen gave them a reassuring nod, silently willing them to stay calm. A few minutes later, Principal Taylor appeared, his tall frame filling the doorway to his office. He was a kind man, with a reputation for being fair but firm, and his face held a mixture of curiosity and concern. What's this about, Karen? He asked, his gaze shifting to the kids. Karen motioned for the group to follow him into his office. Once inside, she took a deep breath and began explaining the situation. She recounted how she had found the kids in the park, the stash of candy, and their confession about taking it from the fundraiser. As she spoke, Principal Taylor's expression shifted from mild surprise to a more serious frown. When Karen finished, she turned to the kids. Now it's your turn. Tell him why you did it. Mia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the quiver in her hands. We wanted to do something nice for our friend Jake. He didn't have a good spring break, and we thought this would cheer him up. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, and we were going to put the candy back. Principal Taylor leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. You thought taking candy from the fundraiser was the way to do that. Mia looked down at her shoes. No, it was a bad idea. We know that now. Tawny added, we'll do whatever it takes to make it right. We'll help with the next fundraiser or anything else you need. The principal studied them for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. Finally, he spoke. What you did was wrong. Stealing, even with good intentions, is still stealing. But I can see that you're genuinely sorry. I appreciate your honesty in coming forward. He leaned forward, his tone softening slightly. Here's what we're going to do. You'll return the candy to the fundraiser coordinator and apologize. After that, you'll help with the next event, just as you suggested. And you'll write a letter to the PTA explaining what happened and what you've learned from this. The kids nodded, relief washing over their faces. Karen felt a small sense of pride. They were taking responsibility, and while the road ahead might not be easy, they were willing to face the consequences. As they left the principal's office, Karen thought the ordeal was finally over. But as they walked back toward the park, Emma suddenly stopped in her tracks, her face pale. What's wrong? Karen asked, her voice tinged with concern. Emma hesitated, then whispered, not all the candy came from the fundraiser. Karen's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Mia looked equally stricken. She's right. Some of it. We got it from the corner store. Karen's eyes widened. You stole from the store too. Tawny quickly interjected, no, not exactly. We didn't take it ourselves. Someone gave it to us. Karen's brow furrowed. Who? The kids exchanged nervous glances before Mia muttered, Jake. Karen's mind raced. Jake? The boy they had been trying to cheer up. Why would he be involved? And more importantly, where had he gotten the candy? Something wasn't adding up, and Karen could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier by the second. She took a deep breath. All right, we're going to figure this out. But first, we're going to return what we can to the fundraiser. Then we're going to have a talk with Jake. I need to know exactly what's going on. The kids nodded, their earlier relief replaced with a renewed sense of dread. Karen could see the fear in their eyes, but she also saw determination. Whatever was happening, it was clear this story was far from over. As they headed back toward the park, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than a few kids sneaking candy. There was a deeper story here, one that would challenge not just the kids but the entire community. And Karen, whether she liked it or not, was now at the center of it. Karen didn't waste any time. The moment the kids admitted that Jake had something to do with the candy, she knew she had to get to the bottom of the situation. Jake was a quiet boy, someone who had always flown under the radar in the neighborhood. His family had been struggling since his father lost his job, and Karen had heard whispers about their financial troubles. Still, Jake was known for being polite and reserved, not the kind of kid who would get involved in something questionable. But now, the pieces weren't adding up, and Karen's instincts told her there was more to the story. As they made their way to Jake's house, Karen's mind raced with questions. Had Jake been the mastermind behind the candy stash? If so, how had he managed to get it? And why hadn't the kids mentioned him sooner? She glanced at the group trailing behind her. They looked nervous, whispering amongst themselves, as if they were trying to decide how much more to reveal. Jake's house was a modest, single-story home on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The yard was unkempt, with patches of overgrown grass and a rusty swing set that hadn't been used in years. Karen knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping against the wood with a sense of urgency. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Jake's mother appeared, her face lined with exhaustion. "Oh, Karen," she said, surprised. "What brings you here?" Karen offered a polite but firm smile. "I need to speak with Jake. Is he home?" Jake's mother hesitated, glancing over Karen's shoulder at the group of kids. Her expression shifted to one of concern. "He's in his room. Is something wrong?" "I'm not sure yet," Karen admitted, "but I'd like to talk to him if that's okay." Reluctantly, Jake's mother stepped aside, and Karen led the kids into the small living room. The space was tidy but sparse, with signs of the family's financial struggles evident in the worn furniture and the patched-up curtains. Jake emerged from the hallway a moment later, his face pale and his shoulders hunched. When he saw his friends, his eyes widened, and he froze. "Jake," Karen said, her tone firm but not unkind, "we need to talk about the candy." Jake's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "What about it?" Karen gestured to the group. "Your friends told me some of the candy in their stash came from you. They said you gave it to them. Is that true?" Jake hesitated, his gaze darting toward the floor. "Yeah, I gave them some." Karen took a step closer. "Where did you get it, Jake?" For a moment, it seemed like he wasn't going to answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "From the delivery truck." Karen's heart sank. "The delivery truck? You mean the one that brings supplies to the corner store?" Jake nodded, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "I didn't steal it, though. I swear, it was just there." The driver left the back door open, and some boxes fell out. "I picked them up, and I didn't think anyone would miss them." Karen rubbed her temples, trying to process what she was hearing. "Jake, taking something that doesn't belong to you, even if it's just lying there, is still stealing." "I know," Jake said quickly. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wanted to help. My mom doesn't have money for candy or stuff like that, and I thought maybe I could share it with my friends." The room fell silent. Karen glanced at Jake's mother, who looked horrified but not entirely surprised. It was clear she had been dealing with more than her fair share of challenges lately, and this was just one more thing to add to the pile. Karen took a deep breath and crouched down to Jake's level. "Jake, I understand why you did it, but that doesn't make it right. You've put yourself and your friends in a tough spot, and now we need to make it right. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mess everything up." Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Apologies are a good start, but now you have to take responsibility for your actions. That means we're going back to the store, and you're going to explain what happened to the owner." Jake's eyes widened in panic. "What if they call the police?" Karen shook her head. "They won't. I'll be there with you, and we'll explain everything. But you have to own up to what you did." Jake hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Karen straightened up and turned to the rest of the group. "And the rest of you, this is your chance to do the right thing too. We're going to fix this together." The kids nodded, their earlier nervousness replaced by a sense of determination. Karen couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They had made mistakes, but they were willing to face the consequences, and that was more than she could say for some adults she knew. The walk to the corner store was tense. Jake stayed close to Karen, his hands stuffed in his pockets and his head down. When they arrived, the owner, Mr. Patel, looked up from behind the counter, his expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Karen," he said, "what's going on?" Karen stepped forward, her tone calm and measured. "Mr. Patel, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding, and these kids have something they need to tell you." Jake stepped forward, his voice trembling as he explained what had happened. He admitted to taking the boxes that had fallen from the truck and apologized profusely, his eyes glistening with tears. Karen watched as Mr. Patel's stern expression softened. "You're lucky I'm a forgiving man," he said finally. "What you did was wrong, but I can see you're sorry. I won't involve the police, but I expect you all to make this right." "We will," Karen promised. "The kids will work here after school for a few weeks to make up for the loss, and I'll personally make sure nothing like this happens again." Mr. Patel nodded, satisfied. "That'll do, but don't let me catch you kids pulling a stunt like this again." As they left the store, a weight seemed to lift from everyone's shoulders. The kids had learned a hard lesson, and while there was still work to be done, Karen felt hopeful. They had taken a big step toward growing up, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. Still, as they walked back toward the park, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The candy incident had revealed deeper issues within the community, issues of trust, responsibility, and the pressures faced by families like Jake's. Karen knew there was more work to be done, but for now, she was content to take it one step at a time. The aftermath of the candy incident, as it was quickly dubbed by the Maplewood community, spread through the town faster than Karen anticipated. By the time the kids had finished their first shift, helping Mr. Patel at the corner store, the story had already made its way into neighborhood conversations, local Facebook groups, and even the weekly PTA meeting. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what had happened, and the reactions were as varied as the people giving them. Some residents praised Karen for her handling of the situation. "She's a real pillar of the community," one elderly neighbor remarked. "Those kids could have ended up in a lot worse trouble if she hadn't stepped in." Others, however, were less charitable. "She's always meddling," a disgruntled father grumbled. "If she'd minded her own business, this wouldn't have blown up like it did." Karen, for her part, tried to block out the noise and focus on the task at hand, guiding the kids through their restitution and ensuring the community saw this as a teachable moment rather than an excuse to pile blame onto anyone. The kids were doing their part, but the ripple effects of their actions were beginning to manifest in unexpected ways. One of the first cracks to appear was within the PTA itself. The organization had long been the driving force behind the town's anti-sugar crusade, using the infamous candy mishap from the previous year as a rallying point. They had implemented strict guidelines for school lunches, banned candy sales, and organized educational talks on healthy eating. But the candy incident involving Jake and his friends raised a difficult question. Had they gone too far? At the next PTA meeting, Karen decided to attend, not because she was officially part of the organization. She had always avoided joining, citing a lack of patience for bureaucracy, but because she wanted to ensure the kid's story was told accurately. When she arrived, the room was already buzzing with conversation. Parents sat in rows of folding chairs, and at the front, Mrs. Warner, the PTA president, stood with her usual air of authority. Karen listened as Mrs. Warner opened the meeting with a statement about the incident. "While we commend the children for taking responsibility for their actions," she said, her voice clipped and formal, "this situation highlights the need for even stricter measures to ensure our children are not tempted by unhealthy habits." Karen couldn't stay silent. She stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor as she rose. "With all due respect, Mrs. Warner, I think this incident highlights something entirely different." All eyes turned to her, a mix of curiosity and wariness. Karen wasn't known for sugarcoating her words, an irony not lost on her in this particular context. These kids didn't sneak candy because they were rebelling against rules. They did it because they wanted to share a moment of joy with their friend who's been struggling. They went about it the wrong way, yes, but we can't ignore the fact that this overzealous crackdown on something as simple as candy created an environment where they felt they had to hide. Murmurs rippled through the room, and Karen continued, "I'm not saying we abandon healthy eating initiatives, but we need balance. Teaching kids about moderation and responsibility is far more effective than banning sweets outright and making them feel like they're doing something terrible for enjoying a treat." A woman in the back raised her hand. "So what are you suggesting, Karen? That we just go back to how things were? Let kids eat whatever they want?" Karen shook her head. "I'm suggesting we stop treating candy like it's some forbidden fruit. Because when you make something forbidden, you make it irresistible. Let's teach kids to enjoy it responsibly, not fear it." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Even Mrs. Warner seemed momentarily at a loss for a rebuttal. Karen knew she hadn't won everyone over, but she could see some heads nodding in agreement. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends were learning their own lessons. Working at the corner store under Mr. Patel's watchful eye was no easy task. He had them stocking shelves, sweeping floors, and organizing inventory, all without touching a single piece of candy. At first, the kids grumbled, but as the days went by, they began to take pride in their work. Jake, in particular, seemed to thrive. One afternoon, as Jake finished organizing a display of fruit snacks, Mr. Patel called him over. "You're a hard worker," he said, his tone gruff but kind. "I don't usually take on help, but if you want to keep working here after your punishment is over, I'd be happy to have you." Jake's face lit up. "Really?" "Really," Mr. Patel said. "You've got potential, kid. Just make sure you keep using it for the right reasons." Jake beamed, and for the first time in weeks, Karen saw him smile without a trace of guilt or sadness. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Jake was turning a mistake into an opportunity, and that was no small feat. The ripple effects of the candy incident didn't stop there. The community, inspired by Karen's words at the PTA meeting, began to rethink its approach to addressing health and happiness. Parents started organizing events that struck a balance between fun and education, like a Healthy Treats Bake-Off, where families could showcase creative recipes. The school even reinstated its long-banned spring carnival, complete with a candy booth, albeit one with strict limits on purchases. For Karen, the biggest transformation was within herself. She had always been seen as a disciplinarian, someone who enforced rules rather than questioning them. But the candy incident had shown her the importance of empathy and understanding. She started volunteering at the local youth center, working with kids like Jake who needed guidance and support more than punishment. One evening, as Karen walked home from the center, she saw Jake and his friends playing basketball in the park. They waved when they saw her, and she smiled, waving back. The weight of the candy incident had lifted, replaced by a sense of renewal and growth. The kids had learned from their mistakes. The community had come together, and Karen had found a new sense of purpose. As she reached her front porch, Karen paused and looked out at the quiet street. The whole ordeal had started with a pile of candy, but it had grown into something far more meaningful, a story of redemption, resilience, and the power of a community to come together and find balance. And yet, Karen couldn't help but chuckle as she unlocked her door. Who would have thought a bunch of kids sneaking candy could change so much? Life in Maplewood would never be the same, but for once, that was a good thing. Life in Maplewood settled into a new rhythm in the weeks following the candy incident, but the changes it sparked were far-reaching and transformative. The town, which had always prided itself on its idyllic charm, was now navigating the challenges of balance and understanding in ways it hadn't before. For Karen, the experience had been a revelation, one that reshaped her view of the community, herself, and what it truly meant to make a difference. The kids, Jake, Mia, Tommy, Emma, and Ben, emerged from their punishment not just unscathed but more united than ever. Their shifts at Mr. Patel's store had started as a dreaded consequence, but evolved into a surprising source of pride and growth. Under Mr. Patel's mentorship, they learned lessons that went far beyond shelving products or sweeping floors. He taught them about accountability, the value of hard work, and the importance of second chances. One day, as the kids gathered after their shift to divide up the tips Mr. Patel had decided to share with them, Jake spoke up, his voice tinged with newfound confidence. "You know," he said, "this all started because we wanted to help me. But I think it ended up helping all of us." The others nodded in agreement. Mia added, "Yeah, we messed up. But I feel like we're better because of it. I don't think I ever really understood what it meant to take responsibility until now." Even Tommy, who had initially grumbled about the punishment, admitted, "I didn't think we'd actually make up for what we did, but it feels good to have tried." Their camaraderie didn't go unnoticed. Mr. Patel, who had grown fond of the group, proposed a small project to channel their energy. "What if you kids organized a fundraiser of your own? Something to give back to the community?" At first, the kids were hesitant. A fundraiser, after everything they'd been through. But the idea quickly took root, and soon they were brainstorming ways to turn their punishment into something meaningful. They decided on a spring fling event, an outdoor fair with games, music, and food, aimed at bringing the community together and raising money for families like Jake's who were going through tough times. The idea caught fire, and before long, the whole town was buzzing with anticipation. Karen, who had become something of a reluctant hero in the wake of the candy incident, found herself roped into the planning. Though she initially balked at the idea of coordinating carnival games and managing a bake sale, she couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing the community rally together for a common cause. The day of the spring fling dawned bright and clear. The park was transformed into a colorful wonderland, with streamers, balloons, and hand-painted signs guiding attendees to various attractions. The kids had outdone themselves, organizing everything from a ring toss and face painting to a pie-eating contest that quickly became the day's highlight. Jake, who had initially been the quietest of the group, took charge of the event's main attraction, a booth selling homemade candy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Karen, but it was a testament to how far the kids had come. Jake's candy booth wasn't just about treats. It was a symbol of redemption and the lessons they'd learned. Each candy wrapper bore a small note: enjoy responsibly and share the sweetness. The community showed up in droves. Parents, kids, and even the more skeptical residents who had criticized Karen came out to support the event. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter, music, and the mouth-watering aroma of freshly popped popcorn. Karen, stationed at the bake sale table, found herself smiling more than she had in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a golden glow, the event concluded with a small ceremony. The kids, flanked by Mr. Patel and Karen, presented a check for the funds raised to Jake's mother, who stood in the center of the makeshift stage, with tears streaming down her face. "This means so much to us," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just the money, but knowing that our community cares. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." The crowd erupted in applause, and Karen felt a lump rise in her throat. She had always believed in the power of doing the right thing, but seeing it unfold on such a grand scale was overwhelming. The kids, who had started this journey with a misguided act of rebellion, had turned it into something extraordinary. In the weeks that followed, the spirit of the spring fling lingered in Maplewood. The event had sparked a renewed sense of togetherness, and the town began finding ways to build on that momentum. Local businesses collaborated on more community events, the PTA reevaluated its overly strict policies, and parents started having more open conversations with their kids about balance and understanding. Karen, for her part, found herself at the center of these efforts. Her once critical neighbors now sought her advice, and she began volunteering more regularly at the youth center. Though she still had her moments of sternness, old habits die hard. She had learned the value of listening and connecting before judging. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes and play tag, Jake approached with a small paper bag in hand. "Miss Karen," he said, handing it to her, "we made these at the candy booth, and I thought you might like some." Karen opened the bag to find a handful of homemade caramel clusters wrapped in brightly colored paper. She smiled and picked one up, unwrapping it carefully. "Thank you, Jake. These look wonderful." As she popped a piece into her mouth, Jake hesitated. "Miss Karen, do you think it's weird that everything turned out okay? I mean, after everything that happened?" Karen looked at him thoughtfully. "Not weird, Jake. Just unexpected. But sometimes the best things in life come from the unexpected." Jake nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, I guess you're right." As he ran off to join his friends, Karen leaned back in her chair, savoring the sweet, buttery taste of the caramel. The candy incident, which had started as a moment of chaos, had transformed into a story of growth, redemption, and community. It had brought people together in ways none of them could have anticipated, leaving a lasting mark on everyone involved. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Karen allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment. Life in Maplewood might never be perfect, but it was better, sweeter, even, than it had ever been. And that, Karen decided, was more than enough.